In the heart of New York City, where towering skyscrapers held stories of ambitions and wealth, the lives of the elite thrived on competition. Every handshake was a transaction, every smile a strategy. Amidst the glittering lights and echoing applause of his success, John Rivers, a tech mogul and a man of precision, had mastered this game. With every deal closed and every rival outmaneuvered, John felt invincible, until the night a simple challenge would redefine his world. That evening, at a lavish dinner party in an upscale Manhattan penthouse, a wager was made. It wasn't about stocks, profits, or power plays. It was about something far simpler: winning the trust of someone who couldn't care less about his wealth. What began as a light-hearted bet among friends would unravel into an unpredictable journey of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. John Rivers didn't know it then, but accepting that bet would change everything he thought he understood about himself and the world he dominated. John Rivers stood on the balcony of his penthouse, his gaze fixed on the glittering city skyline. At 34, he was the epitome of success, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company that revolutionized AI software, a man admired and envied in equal measure. His life was a symphony of tailored suits, exclusive parties, and relentless ambition. Yet for all his achievements, there was an emptiness he couldn't quite name, a void masked by the applause of his peers. That night, John attended a dinner party hosted by his oldest rival and occasional friend, Adam Cole. The event was a gathering of New York's elite, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered conversations about market trends. John, as always, commanded the room, his confidence unshakable. As the night unfolded, the conversation turned playful. Adam leaned back in his chair, swirling his whiskey, his sharp eyes glinting with mischief. "You've done it all, John," Adam began smirking. "Made millions, conquered markets, charmed your way through boardrooms. But I doubt you can step out of your world and connect with someone who doesn't worship wealth." John raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What are you getting at, Adam?" Adam gestured toward a nearby waitress, a young woman moving swiftly between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease. "Her, Maria Harper. I bet you can't win her over, let alone marry her. She's not from our world. No glamour, no connections, just hard work and a quiet life. Think you can do it?" John's friends laughed, but he didn't join in. He studied Maria, her tired but determined expression, her simple attire. Something about her unassuming presence piqued his interest. John's pride flared, the challenge too tantalizing to ignore. "And if I do?" John asked, his tone sharp. $2 million, Adam replied. "No tricks, no contracts. It has to be real, a genuine marriage. You have 6 months." The room buzzed with anticipation. John leaned back, his lips curving into a confident smile. "You're on," he said, raising his glass. As the bet was sealed, John couldn't shake the flicker of excitement stirring within him. It wasn't the money. $2 million was pocket change. It was the challenge, the idea of stepping outside his curated world to conquer something or someone unpredictable. The waitress, Maria Harper, was about to become the centerpiece of John Rivers' most audacious gamble yet. But unbeknownst to him, this game would test far more than his charm and confidence. It would unravel the very foundations of his identity, leaving a trail of consequences he could never have foreseen. John Rivers adjusted his tailored overcoat as he pushed open the door to Mel's Diner, the small eatery where Maria Harper worked. The faint aroma of fried food and coffee hung in the air, a stark contrast to the luxury he was accustomed to. It wasn't the kind of place someone like him frequented, yet here he was, taking his first step into a world far removed from his own. The clinking of utensils and muffled chatter filled the room, but John's attention was fixed on Maria. She moved between tables with precision, her uniform slightly rumpled, her ponytail swinging as she worked. There was a quiet resilience about her, something he couldn't quite place, but found oddly compelling. Maria approached his table with a notepad in hand, her eyes briefly meeting his before flicking away. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady but detached. John offered his most charming smile. "Coffee, black, and maybe a minute of your time?" Maria's brow furrowed slightly. She had served countless customers with smooth lines and overly friendly smiles. But something about this man felt different. His perfectly styled hair, the subtle gleam of his watch. He didn't belong here. "I don't really have time for chats," she replied curtly, jotting down his order. John leaned forward, his tone light. "You must work hard. Doesn't anyone ever tell you to slow down?" Maria shot him a glance, unimpressed. "Bills don't wait for anyone, do they?" she said, turning on her heel and heading toward the counter. John watched her retreat, a mix of amusement and intrigue flickering across his face. Her resistance wasn't what he expected. Most people were eager to please him, to linger in his orbit. Maria, however, was different, and that difference only deepened his resolve. As the evening wore on, Maria finished her shift, her thoughts occupied with the stranger at table 7. She couldn't quite figure him out. His polished appearance and smooth demeanor contrasted starkly with the regular patrons she served. Her son, Ethan, was waiting at home with Mrs. Carter, her elderly neighbor, who often babysat for her. Maria hurriedly packed up, thinking about the art supplies Ethan had been excited about earlier. They weren't new, bought secondhand from a thrift store, but Ethan didn't care. His drawings were his escape, a world of color and imagination, far removed from the struggles Maria worked tirelessly to shield him from. By the time Maria unlocked the door to their small apartment, Ethan was asleep on the couch, crayons scattered around him. She gently kissed his forehead, a soft smile breaking through her exhaustion. Everything she did was for him. Back at his penthouse, John sipped a glass of bourbon, his thoughts drifting to Maria. He replayed their brief exchange, the subtle hints of her guarded nature. Adam's voice echoed in his mind. "I bet you can't win her over." John's ego burned at the thought of failure. He wasn't just driven by the bet. There was something about Maria that challenged him. She wasn't captivated by his status, his charm, or his wealth. For the first time in years, John felt genuinely intrigued by someone, and it was a feeling he couldn't ignore. The next day, John returned to the diner, this time dressed more casually. He didn't want to seem out of place. As Maria approached his table, her expression was neutral, her professional mask firmly in place. "You're back," she said, her tone devoid of enthusiasm. "I am," John replied, flashing a smile. "Figured I'd try the pancakes this time. Any recommendations?" Maria's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "They're decent. Coffee?" "Of course," John said. "And maybe a conversation?" Maria raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "Look, I don't know what you're after, but I don't have time for games." John leaned back, his expression softening. "I'm not playing games, just trying to get to know you." Maria hesitated, her instincts warning her against trusting a man like him. But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that seemed out of place for someone so polished. With a sigh, she nodded. "Fine. One conversation. After my shift." That evening, John waited outside the diner as Maria clocked out. She approached him cautiously, her guard up. "So, what do you want to talk about?" "Everything," John said with a grin. "Tell me about you. Your life." Maria crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Why?" "Because I'm curious," John replied. And maybe I want to prove that I'm not just some guy passing through. Maria studied him for a moment before deciding to humor him. Fine, I'm Maria Harper. I work here to pay the bills and take care of my son. That's my life. Simple as that. And your son? What's he like? John asked, his tone genuine. Maria's expression softened slightly. Ethan's 6, loves to draw. He's got this imagination that's way too big for this tiny apartment of ours. John nodded, sensing a crack in her armor. Sounds like an amazing kid. You must be proud. Maria didn't respond immediately, her eyes drifting to the ground. I am, she said softly. He's everything to me. Their conversation continued, with John carefully steering away from topics that might raise her suspicions. He found himself genuinely interested in her world, her struggles, and the fierce love she had for her son. For the first time, the bet felt secondary to the connection he was beginning to feel. As they parted ways, Maria couldn't help but feel conflicted. John Rivers was an enigma, charming, persistent, and completely out of her league. But there was something about him that made her curious. She wasn't ready to trust him, but for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. John, on the other hand, walked away with a sense of accomplishment. He had taken the first step in winning Maria over, but something unexpected lingered in his mind. This wasn't just about the bet anymore. Maria's authenticity and strength had struck a chord in him, one that he couldn't ignore. The next few days found John Rivers making a habit of stopping by Mel's diner. Each visit was deliberate, each interaction with Maria Harper calculated yet tinged with something he didn't fully understand himself. While his intentions began with the $2 million bet, he found himself drawn more to Maria's resilience, her unshakable dedication to her son, and the quiet strength that emanated from her every action. On a brisk Wednesday morning, John strolled into the diner, greeted by the clatter of dishes and the soft hum of a radio playing oldies. Maria was at the counter, jotting something on a notepad. She glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable, before returning to her work. Morning, Maria, John said, sliding into his usual booth by the window. Maria approached, her tone professional. Coffee again? Or are you trying the pancakes today? John chuckled. You know, I might just surprise you one of these days. Maria rolled her eyes, but didn't suppress the faint smirk tugging at her lips. I'll get your coffee. As she walked away, John noticed the weariness in her step. Something about the sight stirred a strange mix of guilt and admiration in him. He wasn't used to people resisting his charm, and Maria's refusal to fawn over him only heightened his curiosity. Meanwhile, Maria's home life provided a stark contrast to the polished world John inhabited. In their small apartment, Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and scraps of paper. His drawings depicted fantastical creatures and vivid landscapes, an escape from the reality Maria fought so hard to improve for him. Look, Mom, Ethan said, holding up a colorful drawing of a dragon. This one's for you. Maria smiled, ruffling his hair. It's perfect, sweetheart. You've got a real talent. Ethan's eyes sparkled. Do you think I could be an artist one day? Maria crouched beside him, her voice soft but firm. You can be anything you want, Ethan. Just remember to work hard and never give up, okay? Ethan nodded enthusiastically, his determination matching Maria's own. As she watched him return to his drawings, a pang of worry gnawed at her. The world wasn't always kind to dreamers, and she feared the struggles he might face. Back at the diner, John decided to change tactics. Instead of flashy displays or overly charming remarks, he opted for a quieter approach. He began leaving thoughtful tips with little notes attached, Short messages like, "Great coffee today," or "Thanks for the smile." At first, Maria ignored them, assuming it was just another rich guy's attempt to show off. But over time, she couldn't deny the sincerity behind his gestures. One evening, as Maria cleared John's table, she found a small sketchpad wrapped in simple paper. Attached was a note. "For Ethan. Every artist deserves a fresh canvas." Maria hesitated, the gesture catching her off guard. She glanced toward John, who was standing by the door, his hands in his pockets. He offered a small wave before stepping outside. That night, Maria gave Ethan the sketchpad, watching as his eyes lit up. "Who's it from?" he asked, flipping through the crisp pages. "Just a customer from work," Maria said, her tone cautious. But inside, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, gratitude mixed with wariness. Across town, Adam Cole was growing impatient. Over drinks at an exclusive rooftop bar, he grilled John about his progress. "So, how's the waitress? Winning her over yet?" John sipped his whiskey, his expression carefully neutral. "It's a process. She's not like the women we usually deal with." Adam laughed, a sharp edge to his tone. "I'd hope not. That's the whole point, isn't it? Or are you actually starting to care?" John's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The truth was, Adam's words struck a nerve. The bet had begun as a game, a test of his charm and influence. But now, with each conversation and every glimpse into Maria's life, John found himself questioning his own motives. "Don't worry about it," John said finally, forcing a smile. "I've got this under control." Adam smirked, raising his glass. "Here's to your victory, then." Despite John's efforts, Maria remained guarded. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, she sat by the window, staring out at the flickering city lights. Her thoughts were a jumble of questions and doubts. Why was John Rivers, a man who clearly belonged to another world, so interested in her? And more importantly, what did he want? Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Lisa Carter. "Lisa, he showed up again today. What does he even want?" Maria sighed, typing back a quick response. "Maria, not sure. Maybe he's bored." Lisa, well, don't let your guard down. Guys like that always have an angle." Maria stared at the screen, Lisa's words echoing her own fears. She couldn't afford to get swept up in John's world, not when she had Ethan to think about. But even as she resolved to keep her distance, a small part of her couldn't deny the curiosity creeping in. The next morning, John arrived at the diner earlier than usual, carrying a box of pastries from a nearby bakery. He approached the counter, where Maria was pouring coffee. "These are for the staff," he said, placing the box on the counter. "I figured you could all use a treat." Maria glanced at him, her expression skeptical. "Why are you doing this?" John shrugged, his smile disarming. "Because I want to. No strings attached." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks. I'll make sure everyone gets one." As John took his usual seat, Maria found herself watching him out of the corner of her eye. For all his charm and polished exterior, there was something about his persistence that felt genuine. She didn't trust him, not yet, but she couldn't deny that he was trying. Later that evening, as Maria walked home with Ethan, she caught herself thinking about John. His gestures, his questions, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her life. It was all so unexpected. She glanced down at Ethan, who was chattering about his latest drawing, and felt a pang of guilt. Was she being too hard on John? Or was she right to be cautious? John, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse, staring out at the glittering skyline. He thought about Maria, about the life she had built for herself and Ethan, despite the odds stacked against her. For the first time in years, John felt unsure of himself. The bet had been a spark, but now it was Maria's strength and authenticity that kept him coming back. As the night stretched on, both John and Maria found themselves grappling with the same question. Could two people from such different worlds ever truly connect? The chilly autumn air rolled in as John Rivers once again stepped into Mel's diner. This time, though, he didn't come with his usual air of confidence or light-hearted charm. Something about Maria Harper, her son Ethan, and their unyielding resilience had started to stir something deeper in him. The bet with Adam still lingered in the back of his mind, but it felt more like a shadow now, its edges blurred by the sincerity of his growing fascination with Maria's life. John walked in, carrying a medium-sized gift bag. As he slid into his usual booth, Maria raised an eyebrow at him from across the counter. She made her way over, her hands gripping a coffee pot. "Back again?" she asked, her tone tinged with equal parts exasperation and curiosity. "Can't stay away," John replied, grinning. He set the gift bag on the table, pushing it toward her. "This is for Ethan." Maria's expression shifted to one of caution. "What is it?" "Art supplies," John said simply. "Sketch pads, colored pencils, markers, the works. I noticed how talented he is." Maria froze, her grip on the coffee pot tightening slightly. "You didn't need to do that." "I know," John said, leaning back in the booth, "but I wanted to." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "John, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept this." John held her gaze, his voice softening. "Maria, it's not charity. It's just something I thought might make him happy. You can think of it as a thank you for putting up with me." Maria hesitated. The sincerity in his voice made it harder to refuse, but her instincts still screamed caution. "I don't want Ethan getting attached," she said finally, her voice quieter. "He's been let down before." John nodded, his expression serious. "I get it. I do. But this isn't about letting anyone down. It's just a small gesture." After a moment, Maria sighed and took the bag. "Thank you, but don't think this means I trust you." John smiled faintly. "Fair enough." Later that evening, Maria sat with Ethan at their modest kitchen table. She pulled out the sketch pads and art supplies, laying them out in front of him. Ethan's eyes widened in awe. "Wow, Mom! Are these for me?" Maria nodded, forcing a small smile. "A customer from work. Thought you might like them." Ethan grinned, already diving into the markers. As he started sketching, Maria watched him, her heart aching with a mix of gratitude and unease. She hated the idea of owing John anything, but seeing Ethan's joy made it difficult to dismiss the gesture entirely. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "Lisa, he gave Ethan art supplies? What's his deal?" Maria: "I don't know, but Ethan loves them." Lisa: "Be careful, Maria. Guys like that don't do things for free." Maria sighed, setting her phone down. Lisa's words echoed her own fears, but she couldn't deny that John's actions seemed different, genuine even. Still, she resolved to keep her guard up. Meanwhile, John found himself face to face with Adam at an upscale cigar lounge. Adam leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of bourbon. "You're getting too involved," Adam said, his tone light but laced with mockery. "What's next? You're going to propose?" John smirked, though the comment struck a nerve. "I'm just playing the long game." Adam laughed. "Sure you are. But remember, John, this is a bet, not a love story. Don't lose sight of that." John's jaw tightened. He hated the smug tone in Adam's voice, but he couldn't deny the truth behind the words. Was he losing sight of the original goal? And if so, did it even matter anymore? A week later, John approached Maria with a bold suggestion. There's a charity gala next weekend, he began, catching her off guard as she refilled coffee cups at the diner. It's for an art initiative, funding programs for kids like Ethan. Maria blinked, taken aback. And you're telling me this because I want you and Ethan to come, John said. It'll be a chance for Ethan to see some amazing art, and maybe you'll see a different side of my world. Maria frowned, her skepticism clear. Your world isn't mine, John. I don't belong there. John shook his head. You belong wherever you want to be. Look, just think about it, okay? No pressure. Maria hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. I'll think about it. The night of the gala arrived, and Maria found herself stepping into a world she had only seen in movies. Dressed in a simple but elegant dress John had arranged for her, she felt out of place amidst the glittering chandeliers and impeccably dressed guests. Ethan, however, was captivated. His wide-eyed wonder as he gazed at the artwork brought a smile to Maria's face, momentarily easing her discomfort. John stayed close, sensing her unease. You okay? He asked quietly. Maria nodded stiffly. Just trying not to knock over anything expensive. John chuckled. Relax, you're doing great. As the evening went on, Maria began to see a different side of John. He mingled effortlessly with the guests, introducing Maria and Ethan with genuine pride. For the first time, she started to wonder if there might be more to him than she had assumed. Toward the end of the night, John found Maria standing by a large abstract painting, her expression thoughtful. What do you think? He asked, joining her. Maria shrugged. I don't get it, but Ethan seems to love it. John smiled. That's the thing about art. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to make you feel something. Maria glanced at him, surprised by the insight. I didn't expect you to be so philosophical. John chuckled. There's a lot you don't know about me, Maria. She looked away, her tone softening. Maybe. As they left the gala, Ethan clutching a small sketchbook gifted by one of the artists, Maria found herself reflecting on the night. For all her doubts, John had gone out of his way to make them feel welcome. It didn't erase her reservations, but it planted a seed of trust. Meanwhile, John watched Maria and Ethan from a distance, a strange warmth spreading through him. The bet with Adam felt increasingly insignificant. What mattered now was earning Maria's trust, not for a game, but for something real. The morning air was brisk, a sharp reminder that winter was creeping closer. John Rivers sat in his sleek black car, parked across the street from Mel's diner. Through the frosted windshield, he could see Maria moving about inside, taking orders and serving customers with her usual determined efficiency. She was a paradox, tough yet tender, guarded yet giving. The more John watched her, the more he felt the distance between their worlds. But today, that gap would close, for better or worse. John stepped into the diner, immediately catching Maria's eye. She sighed, setting down a tray of empty cups. You're persistent. I'll give you that. John smirked. Good morning to you too, Maria. What is it this time? She asked, crossing her arms. I want to invite you and Ethan to spend the day with me, John said. Nothing fancy. Just a chance to get to know each other better. Maybe visit the museum Ethan loved at the gala. Maria raised an eyebrow. You think you can just waltz into my life and schedule our time like that? John held up his hands in mock surrender. No waltzing, I promise. You can pick the time and place. Maria hesitated. She wanted to say no, to remind him that she didn't trust his intentions. But Ethan's enthusiasm for John had been growing, and she couldn't deny the pull of curiosity. Fine, she said finally. Saturday, noon. When Saturday arrived, John waited anxiously outside Maria's modest apartment building. He had dressed down for the occasion, jeans and a sweater, instead of his usual tailored suits, but still felt out of place amidst the aging brick facade and narrow streets. Maria and Ethan emerged, bundled against the chill. Ethan grinned up at John. "Are we going to see the big paintings again?" "Something like that," John said, smiling. The day began at the museum, where John made a concerted effort to focus on Ethan, pointing out different exhibits and asking the boy about his favorite artists. Maria watched from a distance, her skepticism softening as she saw the genuine bond forming between John and her son. At one point, Ethan tugged at John's sleeve. "Do you like to draw?" John chuckled. "I'm more of a numbers guy, but I could try." Ethan handed him a small sketch pad, and John awkwardly attempted to sketch a tree. His effort earned a giggle from Ethan and a rare smile from Maria. After the museum, John suggested grabbing lunch at a nearby park. They sat on a weathered bench, eating sandwiches and watching Ethan run around with his new sketch pad. "Not exactly your usual crowd," Maria remarked, gesturing to the bustling families and street performers. John shrugged. "Maybe I needed a change." Maria studied him, her expression guarded. "Why? What's so wrong with your world?" John hesitated. "It's empty sometimes. Lots of people, but not much connection. It's hard to explain." Maria frowned, her voice softening. "Must be nice, though. Not worrying about bills or anything, really." John looked at her, his tone serious. "Maria, I know my life seems easy compared to yours, but money doesn't solve everything. Trust me." Maria's skepticism returned. "Says the guy with a penthouse and a driver." John sighed. "Fair enough." As the day drew to a close, John walked Maria and Ethan back to their apartment. Ethan was buzzing with excitement, clutching a new sketch pad John had bought him at the museum gift shop. Maria, however, was less enthused. "You didn't have to buy him that," she said, as they reached her door. "I wanted to," John replied simply. Maria shook her head. "That's not how this works, John. You can't just throw money at things and expect them to be okay." "I'm not trying to buy you, Maria," John said, his voice firm. I want to help." Maria looked at him, her expression a mix of frustration and something else, something unspoken. "Good night, John," she said finally, ushering Ethan inside. John stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. He had made progress, but it was clear Maria wasn't ready to let him in fully. Not yet. Back in his penthouse, John found Adam waiting for him. Adam lounged on the leather couch, sipping a scotch, his expression smug. "So," Adam drawled, "how's the bet coming along?" John frowned, pouring himself a drink. "It's not a bet anymore." Adam raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Then why are you still playing house with the waitress and her kid?" John's jaw tightened. "Because it's more than that now. You wouldn't understand." Adam laughed. "You're falling for her, aren't you?" John didn't answer. He hated that Adam could see through him so easily. But the truth was undeniable. Meanwhile, Maria was dealing with her own turmoil. That night, she received a call from her estranged sister, Hannah, who had always disapproved of Maria's choices. "I heard you've been spending time with some rich guy," Hannah said, her tone sharp. "Is that really what you want, Maria? To be someone's charity case?" Maria's grip on the phone tightened. "It's not like that." "Then what is it?" Hannah pressed. "Because it sounds like you're setting yourself up to get hurt." Maria hung up, her chest tight with frustration. She hated that Hannah's words echoed her own fears. Could she really trust John? Or was he just another person who would let her down? The following week, John returned to the diner. He was greeted by Maria's usual wary expression. But there was something else, something more vulnerable. "Maria," he began, "I know I've been pushing, but I just want to say, I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." Maria looked at him, her defenses wavering. "Why? Why do you care?" John hesitated, then said simply, "Because you and Ethan matter. More than I ever expected." Maria's eyes softened, but she quickly looked away. "I don't know if I can believe that." John nodded. "I'll keep proving it until you do." The chilly morning sun filtered through the blinds of John Rivers' penthouse, casting long shadows on the minimalist decor. John sat on the edge of his leather armchair, staring at a velvet box in his hand. Inside lay a ring, not the kind one might expect from a billionaire. It was modest, elegant, and simple, much like Maria Harper herself. For weeks he had wrestled with the idea. Initially, this was supposed to be a game, a bet that would stroke his ego and secure a laugh with Adam. But now it felt different. Maria and Ethan had brought something into his life he couldn't quite name. Purpose, maybe. Or perhaps something deeper, scarier. John couldn't shake the thought that this was about more than winning. Later that day, John stepped out of his car onto the cracked pavement outside Maria's apartment building. He had never felt so unsure of himself. Every calculated business deal he'd ever made seemed trivial compared to the weight of what he was about to do. Maria opened the door, surprised to see him. She looked tired, but there was a warmth in her eyes that had grown over the weeks. "John, what are you doing here so early?" "I wanted to talk to you," he said, his voice steady. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. Ethan was at the small kitchen table, scribbling furiously in his sketchbook. He glanced up and waved, a big grin on his face. "Hey, John." "Hey, buddy." John smiled, then turned back to Maria. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Maria's brow furrowed, but she motioned toward the small living room. They sat on the worn couch, and Maria folded her arms, her skepticism returning. "All right. What's this about?" John took a deep breath. "Maria, I know this might seem sudden, but I've been thinking about us a lot. You and Ethan have become so important to me. I want to build something real with you." Maria blinked, caught off guard. "What are you saying?" John reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. Her eyes widened as he opened it to reveal the ring. "Maria Harper," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, the room was silent, except for Ethan's pencil scratching on paper in the background. Maria stared at the ring, her mind racing. "John," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he urged, leaning forward slightly. "I know we come from different worlds, but I want to make this work. I want to be there for you and Ethan." Maria shook her head, standing abruptly. "This is crazy. You barely know me, and I barely know you. Marriage? That's not something you just decide on a whim." John rose to his feet, his expression earnest. "This isn't a whim, Maria. I've never been more certain of anything." Her voice rose, a mix of anger and fear. "You don't understand my life, John. You don't know what it's like to scrape by, to put someone else's needs ahead of your own every single day. And now, you show up with a ring, expecting me to just, what? Say yes, and let you sweep me off my feet?" "I'm not trying to sweep you off your feet," John replied, his tone firm but gentle. "I'm trying to stand beside you, to help you carry the weight you've been bearing alone." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. I can't just trust you like that. I have Ethan to think about. John stepped closer, his voice softening. I know. And I promise this is as much about him as it is about you. He deserves a stable, loving home. I want to give him that. Ethan appeared in the doorway holding his sketchbook. Mom? What's wrong? Maria quickly wiped her eyes and turned to him, forcing a smile. Nothing, sweetheart. John was just asking me something important. Ethan looked at John, his curiosity piqued. Did you ask her to marry you? Maria's jaw dropped. Ethan, what? He said innocently. I heard it on TV once. A guy gets on one knee and asks with a ring. John chuckled despite the tension. That's pretty much what I did, buddy. Ethan beamed. That's cool. I like John, Mom. Can we say yes? Maria knelt down to Ethan's level, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Ethan, this isn't something we can decide just because it sounds cool. It's a big decision. But John's nice, Ethan insisted. And he bought me the art stuff, and he talks to me about my drawings. He's not like, you know. Maria sighed, glancing back at John. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. We'll talk about it later, okay? Okay, Ethan said, though he looked disappointed. That evening, Maria sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the ring still in its box on the coffee table. She turned it over in her hands, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and longing. When John called her phone, she almost didn't answer, but something in her heart told her to pick up. Maria, John said when she finally answered, I don't want to pressure you. I just want you to know that I meant every word. Take all the time you need. His sincerity gave her pause. I'll think about it, she said softly, then hung up. Across town, John found himself in an uncomfortable meeting with Adam. His old friend smirked over his glass of scotch. So, did she say yes yet? Adam asked, his tone dripping with amusement. John glared at him. Back off, Adam. This isn't just about the bed anymore. Adam laughed. Oh, come on, John. Don't tell me you're actually falling for her. John clenched his fists. I care about her and Ethan. This is real now. Adam shrugged, unconvinced. Real or not, a bet's a bet. Don't forget that. John stormed out, his resolve stronger than ever. He would prove Adam wrong, not for the money, but for Maria and Ethan. The next morning, Maria made her way to the park, where she knew John liked to jog. She found him sitting on a bench, staring out at the frozen lake. John, she called, her voice steady. He turned, his expression lighting up at the sight of her. Maria. She approached slowly, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets. I've been thinking about everything, and I'm scared. But Ethan trusts you, and a part of me does too. John stood, his breath visible in the cold air. Does that mean? Maria took a deep breath. Yes, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets, she said, her voice firm. If we're doing this, it has to be honest. John nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. I promise. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in years, Maria allowed herself to hope. The air in Manhattan was crisp as the holidays approached, and John Rivers was determined to show Maria and Ethan a side of his life they hadn't seen before. It had been a week since Maria cautiously accepted his proposal, and though the ring glittered on her finger, there remained a layer of uncertainty between them. To ease her concerns and bring them closer, John extended an invitation to a charity gala hosted by his company. This isn't just about the event, John assured Maria one evening over dinner at her apartment. I want Ethan to see the world of art up close. It's something he loves, and this gala supports local artists. Maria hesitated. She wasn't one for extravagant events, and the thought of walking into a room filled with wealthy socialites made her stomach churn. "John, I'm not sure if we'll fit in there." "You don't have to fit in," he said gently. "Just be yourselves. That's all I want." Ethan, sitting at the table with a coloring book, looked up excitedly. "Will there be paintings and stuff, Mom?" "Yes, buddy," John replied with a smile. "Paintings, sculptures, maybe even some artists you can talk to." Maria sighed, glancing at Ethan's eager face. "All right," she said finally. "But don't expect us to blend in." The gala was held in a grand ballroom, its ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers and walls lined with art displays. Maria stepped inside, her hand gripping Ethan's tightly, her heart pounding at the sight of the lavish surroundings. She wore a simple navy blue dress that John had insisted she pick out, and though she looked stunning, she felt out of place. "You look beautiful," John whispered as he guided them into the room. "Trust me, you belong here." Ethan's eyes lit up as he spotted a vibrant painting of a cityscape. "Wow, look at that one," he exclaimed, pulling Maria toward it. As Maria and Ethan admired the art, John introduced them to a few of his colleagues. Though most were polite, Maria couldn't ignore the subtle glances and whispers that followed them around the room. She felt like an outsider, a curiosity in John's world. At one point, a woman in a sequined gown approached John with a glass of champagne in hand. "John Rivers," she drawled, her smile sharp. "It's been ages, and who might this be?" "This is Maria Harper," John said, his tone calm but firm. "And her son, Ethan." The woman's eyes flicked over Maria, her smile growing tighter. "Charmed," she said before turning back to John. "Well, I hope we'll catch up later." Maria felt her cheeks flush, but John placed a reassuring hand on her back. "Ignore her," he murmured. "She doesn't matter." Despite the initial discomfort, the evening took a brighter turn when Ethan met a local artist who specialized in abstract work. The artist, a kind older man named Walter, knelt down to Ethan's level and showed him how to blend colors on a palette. "You've got an eye for this," Walter said, smiling at Ethan's excited expression. "Keep practicing, and one day you might have your own exhibit." Ethan beamed, and Maria couldn't help but smile, her worries momentarily fading. Seeing her son so happy reminded her why she had agreed to this unconventional arrangement with John. As the evening progressed, John guided Maria onto the dance floor during a slow number. She hesitated, feeling the eyes of the room on them, but John's reassuring smile convinced her to stay. "You're doing great," he said, as they swayed to the music. "I feel like I'm under a microscope," Maria admitted, her voice low. "You're with me," John replied. "Let them stare. It doesn't change how I feel about you." While Maria began to relax, Adam Cole lingered at the edge of the ballroom, sipping his drink and watching the couple. His amusement at John's efforts had turned into something darker, an irritation at how seriously John seemed to be taking this bet. Later that night, as the guests began to filter out, Adam cornered John near the bar. "You're playing quite the convincing role," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "Almost makes me think you're forgetting the stakes." John glared at him. "What's your point, Adam?" "My point," Adam said, leaning in, "is that you're getting in too deep. Don't lose sight of what this is. A game. You win, you get the money, and we laugh about it later. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is real." "It is real," John snapped. "At least, it is to me." Adam smirked. "Well, that's cute. Let's see how real it feels when she finds out the truth." John clenched his fists, forcing himself to walk away before he said something he'd regret. But Adam's words lingered, a cold reminder of the secret that threatened to unravel everything. Back at Maria's apartment, Ethan couldn't stop talking about the gala. "Mom, did you see all those colors? And the statues? I want to make something like that one day." Maria smiled, tucking him into bed. "You can do anything you set your mind to, sweetheart." John stayed in the living room, waiting for Maria to return. When she did, she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly. "Ethan had an amazing time." "I'm glad," John replied, his voice soft. "And what about you? Did you hate it as much as you thought you would?" Maria hesitated, then shook her head. "It wasn't so bad. But your world, it's intimidating, John." "I know," he admitted. "But you're stronger than you realize. You're not just surviving, Maria. You're thriving. And I want to help you do even more." Her expression softened, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself to feel the hope that had been growing in her heart. "We'll see," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. As Maria drifted off to sleep that night, John lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The warmth of the evening couldn't fully chase away the chill of Adam's words. He knew he was running out of time. If Maria discovered the truth about the bet, everything they had built would come crashing down. He resolved to tell her himself, on his own terms, before Adam could use it against him. But the question remained, would Maria forgive him? Or would this secret destroy the fragile trust they had begun to build? The days following the gala passed in a blur of quiet routine and lingering thoughts. For Maria, the night at the charity event had been an eye-opening glimpse into John's world, one of elegance and influence, yet tinged with judgment and superficiality. She couldn't deny the charm John brought to every interaction, but she remained guarded, uncertain of his true intentions. Meanwhile, John found himself grappling with an unfamiliar sensation: vulnerability. He was no stranger to taking risks, but proposing to Maria felt different. It wasn't just a move to win a bet. It was the culmination of emotions he hadn't expected to develop. Sitting in his office one evening, John stared at the small velvet box on his desk. The ring inside was elegant, yet understated, chosen with Maria's modest tastes in mind. He turned it over in his hand, knowing the significance of what he was about to do. He had to be careful. A part of him feared rejection, not just for the sake of his pride, but because he genuinely wanted her to say yes. But there was another fear, one he couldn't ignore. The secret of the bet loomed large, threatening to unravel everything if it came to light. It was a chilly Thursday evening when John arrived unannounced at Maria's apartment. She opened the door, surprised to see him holding a bouquet of fresh daisies. "For you," he said, offering the flowers with a soft smile. Maria raised an eyebrow but accepted them, placing them in a vase on the kitchen counter. "What's the occasion?" "Do I need a reason to bring you flowers?" he teased, though his heart was pounding in his chest. Maria glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. "You're acting strange." "Maybe I am," John admitted, "but it's because there's something I want to talk to you about." She motioned for him to sit at the small dining table. Ethan was in his room working on a new painting, leaving them alone in the cozy living space. John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Maria," he began, his voice steady but earnest. "Since I met you, my life has changed in ways I didn't expect. You've shown me a world beyond everything I thought I knew. A world of resilience, strength, and love." Maria frowned slightly, sensing the weight of his words. "John, what are you getting at?" He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the velvet box. As he opened it to reveal the ring, Maria's eyes widened in shock. "I want to spend my life with you, Maria," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Not because of what I can give you, but because of what you've given me. A sense of purpose, a reason to be better. Maria stared at the ring, her mind racing. This was unexpected. Too unexpected. She had grown to care for John, but this felt rushed, overwhelming, and out of step with the cautious life she had built for herself and Ethan. "John," she said slowly, her voice tinged with disbelief, "we barely know each other. I mean, really know each other. Marriage it's not something I take lightly." "I know," John replied, his gaze unwavering. "And I don't either. But I believe in us, Maria. I believe we can build something real." Maria's heart ached with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his intentions were genuine. But her past experiences had taught her to be wary of promises that seemed too good to be true. "What about Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's my whole world, John. If this doesn't work out, it's not just me who gets hurt." John leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I know how important Ethan is to you, and I want to be there for him too. Not just as your partner, but as someone he can rely on." Maria fell silent, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and hope. The sincerity in John's eyes was undeniable, but a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than he was letting on. That night, Maria tucked Ethan into bed and sat beside him as he held up his latest painting. It was a colorful depiction of their small apartment, with a figure that looked remarkably like John standing beside them. "Mom, do you think John will stay with us forever?" Ethan asked innocently, his big eyes filled with hope. Maria's throat tightened. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" "Because I like him," Ethan said simply. "He makes you smile, and he talks to me like I'm important." Maria kissed his forehead, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. "We'll see, Ethan. We'll see." Back at his penthouse, John sat in the darkened living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The proposal had not gone as planned, and Maria's hesitation gnawed at him. He couldn't blame her. After all, he had started this relationship under false pretenses. Adam's words from the gala echoed in his mind. What happens when she finds out? John clenched his jaw, knowing he couldn't delay the inevitable much longer. If Maria accepted his proposal, it had to be on honest terms. But how could he tell her the truth without losing her completely? The next morning, John received a text from Maria. "We need to talk." His heart sank as he read the words. Was this her way of letting him down gently? Or was there still hope for them to move forward together? When John arrived at Maria's apartment later that day, he found her sitting at the table, the ring box in front of her. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "John," she began, her voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about us." John held his breath, waiting for her next words. "I need to know something," she continued. "Why me? Out of all the people in your world, why did you choose someone like me?" John hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He knew this was his moment of reckoning, the point where everything could change. "Because you're different," he said finally, his voice filled with emotion. "You're real, Maria. You've shown me a life I never thought I could have." Maria studied him, her gaze searching for any trace of dishonesty. "I want to believe you, John. But if there's anything you're hiding, now is the time to tell me. I won't tolerate lies, not for me, and not for Ethan." John swallowed hard, knowing he was standing at the edge of a precipice. The next words out of his mouth could either save their relationship or destroy it. He began, but the sound of Ethan's laughter from the other room interrupted him. The moment passed, leaving John with a sinking feeling in his chest. He knew he couldn't delay the truth much longer, but for now, he chose to stay silent, hoping he could find the right way to tell her before it was too late. The days following John's proposal were marked by a delicate truce between him and Maria. While she hadn't accepted his offer outright, she hadn't rejected it either. This left John in a state of anxious anticipation, unsure of where he truly stood with her. For Maria, it was a time of introspection. She was torn between her growing affection for John and the lingering doubts that clouded her mind. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrents between the two adults, was thrilled by John's increasing presence in their lives. He chatted excitedly about their weekend trips to the park, John's help with his art projects, and the little moments that made him feel like part of a real family. But Maria couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something about John's intentions wasn't entirely transparent. One evening, as Maria was closing up the diner, Adam appeared unexpectedly. His polished demeanor and sharp suit made him stand out amidst the humdrum of the small eatery. Maria immediately felt a sense of unease as he approached her. "You must be Maria," Adam said, his smile as charming as it was disingenuous. "Yes. And you are?" Maria asked cautiously. "I'm Adam Cole, a friend of John's," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "I've heard so much about you." Maria forced a polite smile, but Adam's presence felt intrusive. "What brings you here?" Adam leaned against the counter, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "I just wanted to meet the woman who's turned John's world upside down. You've got quite the effect on him, you know." Maria frowned, sensing there was more to Adam's visit than mere curiosity. "Is that so?" Adam's grin widened. "Oh, absolutely. In fact, John's been so invested in, well, let's just say he's got a lot riding on you." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing," Adam said, feigning innocence. "I wouldn't want to spoil anything. Just make sure you know who you're dealing with, Maria." With that cryptic remark, Adam left, leaving Maria with a gnawing sense of doubt. His words echoed in her mind, fueling her suspicions about John's true motives. Meanwhile, John was grappling with his own inner turmoil. The weight of the bet hung over him like a dark cloud, and Adam's meddling only added to his stress. He knew he had to tell Maria the truth, but the thought of losing her and Ethan terrified him. In an attempt to distract himself, John threw himself into his work, but even his once fulfilling career couldn't silence the growing guilt. He began avoiding Adam, knowing that his so-called friend was reveling in the chaos he had created. John's penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt empty and oppressive. One evening, John sat alone in his office, staring at the engagement ring he had chosen for Maria. He knew that the longer he delayed the truth, the more devastating the fallout would be. But how could he explain that what started as a bet had transformed into something real? Determined to uncover the truth, Maria decided to confront John. She invited him over for dinner, masking her unease with a forced smile. Ethan was thrilled to see John, chattering excitedly as they ate. But Maria's mind was elsewhere, her questions building like a storm. After dinner, she sent Ethan to his room and turned to John. "We need to talk," she said, her tone serious. John nodded, sensing the gravity of her words. "What's on your mind?" Maria hesitated, searching his eyes for any sign of deceit. "Your friend Adam came by the diner the other night." John's stomach sank. "What did he say?" "He said you've got a lot riding on me," Maria replied, her voice steady but laced with suspicion. "What did he mean by that, John?" John felt the air leave his lungs. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready. "Maria, it's complicated." "Complicated?" Maria repeated, her eyes narrowing. That's not an answer, John. I deserve the truth. John took a deep breath, his hands trembling. When we first met, there was a bet. Adam challenged me to marry someone outside of my world, and I accepted. Maria's face went pale, her worst fears confirmed. So, this was all a game to you? A way to prove you could win? It started that way, John admitted, his voice cracking. But it changed, Maria. You changed me. What I feel for you and Ethan is real. The bet doesn't matter anymore. Maria stood up, her anger and hurt spilling over. How can I believe that, John? How can I trust anything you say when it all started with a lie? The conversation escalated as Maria unleashed her pain and frustration. For her, John's confession wasn't just a betrayal of their relationship. It was a betrayal of the fragile trust she had begun to rebuild after years of hardship. I let you into my life, into Ethan's life, she said, tears streaming down her face. And you've been lying to us this whole time. I wasn't lying, John pleaded. I didn't tell you because I was afraid of losing you. Please, Maria, give me a chance to make this right. But Maria shook her head, her voice trembling with emotion. I can't do this, John. I can't be part of another lie. Please leave. John tried to argue, but the pain in Maria's eyes silenced him. He nodded reluctantly, his heart breaking as he left her apartment. In the days that followed, John sank into a deep despair. He avoided his usual haunts, cutting himself off from the world. Adam, sensing his vulnerability, reached out, but John refused to speak to him. For the first time in his life, John felt truly alone. Maria, too, struggled with the aftermath of John's confession. She focused on her work and Ethan, trying to shield her son from the emotional turmoil. But at night, she found herself replaying their conversations, torn between anger and the lingering feelings she couldn't deny. Ethan, sensing the tension between the two adults, asked Maria one evening, "Why doesn't John come around anymore?" Maria's heart ached as she tried to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Ethan, but it doesn't mean they don't care. As the days turned into weeks, John knew he couldn't give up. He began to reflect on what truly mattered and realized that his feelings for Maria and Ethan had fundamentally changed him. He decided to take a step back from his career, redirecting his energy toward making amends. John reached out to Maria, not with grand gestures, but with sincerity. He sent her a letter, pouring out his heart and admitting his mistakes. He promised to prove his love through actions, not words, and asked for a chance to rebuild what they had lost. Maria read John's letter late one night, her emotions in turmoil. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing. As she folded the letter and placed it on her nightstand, Ethan walked into the room, holding a drawing of their family, Maria, Ethan, and John. "Do you think John will come back?" Ethan asked, his innocent question striking a chord in Maria's heart. "I don't know," she replied softly, her gaze lingering on the drawing. "But maybe we should find out." John Rivers woke early that morning, his resolve hardened by weeks of reflection and regret. The weight of Maria's rejection had driven him to confront truths he had long ignored about himself, his priorities, and the emptiness of his once glamorous life. He had spent hours drafting plans, not for his company, but for Maria and Ethan. He needed to show them, not just tell them, that he was committed to becoming a man they could trust. The first step was humility. John knew his wealth and power had often been a shield against vulnerability, but this time they were useless. What mattered now was sincerity. And for Maria to believe in his transformation, he had to start from the ground up. John began his efforts by reconnecting with Ethan, whose presence had been a source of unexpected joy and grounding. Knowing Maria's trust would be harder to rebuild, John approached Ethan with caution. One afternoon, he sent a simple message to Maria. "I'd like to see Ethan if he's okay with it. I won't push if you're uncomfortable." Maria hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering over her phone. She finally typed, "You can pick him up after school tomorrow. Don't disappoint him." The following day, John waited outside Ethan's school, nerves gripping him as the bell rang. When Ethan saw him, the boy's face lit up, and he ran toward John, carrying a stack of his drawings. "John, look, I drew more robots like we talked about," Ethan exclaimed, shoving the papers into John's hands. John knelt to Ethan's level, taking in the colorful sketches with genuine admiration. "These are incredible, buddy. You've got a real talent." The two spent the afternoon at a nearby park, Ethan chatting excitedly as they played catch and talked about his dreams of becoming an inventor. John's heart ached with a mix of joy and guilt. He wanted to be part of Ethan's life, not because of the bet, but because he cared deeply for the boy. Meanwhile, Maria remained wary. She watched from her apartment window as John walked Ethan back home, his demeanor more relaxed and genuine than she remembered. When they came inside, John handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" Maria asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "It's not what you think," John replied. "It's a grant proposal. I've started a community fund for single parents to help with education and childcare. I named it after my mother. She raised me on her own, and I never truly appreciated what that meant until now." Maria opened the envelope, scanning the details. The grant wasn't flashy or self-serving. It was practical, aimed at providing real support for struggling families. She looked up at John, her skepticism softening. "This is thoughtful," she admitted, "but it doesn't erase what happened." "I know," John said quietly, "but it's a start." A week later, John invited Maria and Ethan to a community dinner he had organized. The event was held in a modest community center, a stark contrast to the lavish galas he once frequented. The room buzzed with families, local leaders, and volunteers, all eager to hear about the new initiative. Maria hesitated as she entered, her hand on Ethan's shoulder. She was used to being in the background, not the spotlight, but John greeted her with a warm smile, easing her nerves. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice sincere. "I'm glad you're here." During the dinner, John took the stage to speak about the fund and his motivation for starting it. He shared personal stories about his mother and how meeting Maria and Ethan had changed his perspective. His words were heartfelt, and for the first time, Maria saw a side of John that felt completely genuine. As the audience applauded, Maria couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps John truly was changing. Just as John seemed to be making progress, Adam reappeared, determined to derail his redemption. One evening, as John was leaving the community center, Adam confronted him. "Still playing the hero, John?" Adam sneered. "You really think you can erase the past with a few good deeds?" "I'm not trying to erase anything," John replied, his tone firm. "I'm trying to move forward." Adam laughed bitterly. "You've gone soft. The John I knew would never grovel like this." "Maybe that's the problem," John said. "The John you knew wasn't someone I want to be anymore." Adam's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You think Maria's going to forgive you? She deserves to know the truth about everything." "She already knows," John said calmly. "And whether she forgives me or not is up to her." Adam left, his threats lingering in the air, but John refused to let them shake him. He was determined to stay the course, no matter what. That night, Maria received an anonymous message containing a recording of John and Adam's initial bet. Hearing John's voice describing her as a challenge, brought all her doubts flooding back. She confronted John the next day, holding her phone out like a weapon. "Care to explain this?" she demanded, her eyes blazing with anger. John listened to the recording, his face pale but composed. "I won't deny it. That's how it started. But Maria, it's not who I am now. You've seen the changes I've made, the things I've done for you and Ethan. Please, judge me by my actions, not my past mistakes." Maria's anger didn't dissipate, but she saw the pain in John's eyes. He wasn't defending himself or making excuses. He was taking responsibility. She turned away, her emotions in turmoil. "I need time," she said finally. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I'll wait," John replied, his voice steady. "For as long as it takes." Weeks passed, and John continued his efforts, not to win Maria back, but to prove to himself that he was capable of real change. He immersed himself in the community fund, working with local families and building genuine connections. Maria, watching from a distance, couldn't deny the transformation she saw in John. He was no longer the arrogant businessman she had met months ago. He was kinder, humbler, and more grounded. One evening, Ethan showed Maria a drawing he had made. It depicted their family, Maria, Ethan, and John, standing together smiling. Maria's heart ached as she looked at the image. She realized that Ethan saw John as more than a visitor in their lives. He saw him as family. Unable to ignore her feelings any longer, Maria wrote John a letter. In it, she expressed her fears, her doubts, and her hopes. She told him that while she wasn't ready to fully forgive him, she wanted to try, to give him a chance to prove that he could be the partner and father they deserved. When John received the letter, he read it twice, his heart swelling with relief and determination. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Maria's words gave him hope. As John folded the letter, a knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Maria and Ethan standing there, their expressions cautious but open. "Can we talk?" Maria asked softly. John stepped aside, his heart pounding. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of light breaking through the darkness. The evening breeze was cool as Maria and Ethan stepped into John's living room. Ethan clung to Maria's hand, his wide eyes scanning the space. It wasn't the grandeur of John's homes that gave Maria pause this time. It was the vulnerability in John's expression. He stood quietly, waiting for her to speak. "Ethan wanted to see you," Maria began, her voice firm but tinged with hesitation. "And I need to understand what happens next." John knelt to Ethan's level. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I missed you." Ethan's face broke into a grin as he launched himself into John's arms. Maria watched, her heart torn. The bond between John and her son was undeniable, but the wounds of betrayal still festered. She wasn't here to forgive him yet. She was here to see if the man John claimed to be was truly real. The following days were marked by an unspoken truce. Maria agreed to let John spend time with Ethan, but her guard remained up. She often stayed nearby, observing John's interactions with her son. Ethan's laughter filled the room as John helped him assemble a model robot. Their shared love for engineering, bridging the gap between their worlds. But when Ethan was asleep, the house fell into an awkward silence. Maria's glances at John were filled with questions she wasn't ready to voice, and John, sensing her hesitancy, kept his distance. One evening, as Maria tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with innocent curiosity. "Mom, do you still like John?" Maria froze. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because he's nice," Ethan said simply. "And he makes you smile, even when you don't want to." Maria kissed his forehead, unable to answer. Ethan's perception unnerved her. Was it possible John was making her feel something again? John knew he had to do more than just be present. He needed to show Maria that he had changed. One afternoon, he asked Maria to join him for a walk through a local park. She hesitated but agreed, curious about his intentions. As they strolled, John spoke candidly. "I know I can't erase the past, Maria, but I want to show you something." He led her to a modest community garden, filled with vibrant flowers and neatly tended vegetables. A group of children was working alongside volunteers, their laughter filling the air. "This is part of the project I started," John explained. "We're teaching kids about sustainability and providing fresh produce for families in need. It's not much, but it's a start." Maria watched as Ethan joined the group, his face lighting up as he dug into the soil. The scene tugged at her heart, but she refused to let her guard down completely. While John worked to rebuild trust, Adam remained a looming presence. Still bitter over John's rejection of their friendship, Adam sought to undermine him at every turn. He spread rumors about John's motivations, suggesting that the community projects were mere publicity stunts. One evening, Adam confronted Maria outside the diner, where she still worked part-time. "You think John's doing all this for you?" Adam sneered. "It's just another game to him. People like John don't change." Maria stared at him, her temper flaring. "You don't know him like I do." Adam's laughter was cold. "I know him better than you ever will. This isn't about love, Maria. It's about winning. And you're just the prize." Maria walked away, Adam's words echoing in her mind. Doubts crept in, but she resolved to confront John directly, rather than let Adam's poison take root. That night, Maria found John in his office, reviewing plans for the next phase of the community fund. She stepped inside, her arms crossed. "Adam came to see me," she said, her tone sharp. John looked up, his expression wary. "What did he say?" "That this is all a game to you, that you haven't changed." Her voice trembled. "I need to know the truth, John. Why are you doing all this?" John stood, his eyes meeting hers, with unwavering sincerity. "Because I love you, Maria. And I love Ethan. At first, it was about proving something to myself, but that changed the moment I got to know you. You made me see everything differently." Maria's defenses wavered. "And the bet? Was it ever more than a game?" "It started that way," John admitted, his voice low. "But it stopped being a game the moment I realized what I stood to lose." His honesty disarmed her. She nodded, still uncertain but willing to consider the possibility that he was telling the truth. The next few weeks were a slow but steady journey toward reconciliation. John continued his community work, often bringing Maria and Ethan along. Maria watched as John invested not just his money, but his time, mentoring young entrepreneurs and connecting with families who had struggled as she once had. Ethan, meanwhile, flourished under John's attention. The boy's confidence grew, and he began to see John as a true father figure. Maria couldn't ignore the change in her son, or in herself. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, John reached for Maria's hand. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope you'll give me a chance to prove I'm the man you and Ethan need." Maria looked at him, her heart torn. "I'm still scared, John, but I want to believe you." Just as things seemed to be improving, a scandal erupted. A reporter uncovered John's initial bet with Adam and published a sensationalized story. Maria was blindsided, and Ethan overheard classmates mocking her at school. Maria confronted John, her anger and hurt boiling over. "How could you let this happen? I trusted you." John was devastated. "I didn't want this to come out. I swear, Maria, I had nothing to do with it." But Maria's faith was shaken. She took Ethan and left, needing time to process the betrayal. In the days that followed, John worked tirelessly to salvage the trust he had so carefully rebuilt. He held a press conference, publicly acknowledging his mistakes and apologizing to Maria and Ethan. He announced his resignation from his company, pledging to dedicate himself fully to his community work. Maria watched the broadcast, her emotions in turmoil. John's humility and accountability touched her, but the wounds were still fresh. John visited Maria one final time, standing outside her apartment with a simple gift, a photo album filled with pictures of their time together. At the end of the album was a handwritten letter. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter read, "but I want you to know that everything I've done since meeting you has been real. You and Ethan changed my life, and I'll spend the rest of it proving that I'm worthy of the family we could have." Maria read the letter, tears streaming down her face. She opened the door, finding John still waiting. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm willing to try." John's relief was palpable. "That's all I could ever ask for." The days following Maria's tentative agreement to try again were marked by an uneasy balance between hope and hesitation. Maria returned to work at the diner, needing the sense of normalcy, while John immersed himself further in his community initiatives. Their interactions were polite, but distant, both careful to avoid the subjects that had driven them apart. Ethan, on the other hand, was a bright spark. He beamed every time John picked him up from school or helped him with his science projects. Maria watched these moments, torn between gratitude and fear. Could she trust John enough to let him fully into their lives again? One afternoon, while walking through the community garden John had funded, Maria paused to watch him teaching a group of children about planting techniques. He knelt in the soil, his hands dirty as he demonstrated the steps, laughter ringing out from the kids around him. It was a side of John she hadn't seen before. A man not defined by wealth or power, but by a genuine desire to give back. Maria felt a flicker of warmth, but it was tempered by caution. Her walls, built from years of betrayal and heartbreak, wouldn't come down easily. John knew he couldn't rush Maria. He respected her boundaries, letting her dictate the pace of their rebuilding relationship. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the diner, after Maria's shift, he spoke carefully. "Maria," he began, "I know I can't erase the past, but I want to build a future with you and Ethan. What can I do to show you that I'm serious?" Maria sipped her coffee, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the cup. "It's not about grand gestures, John. I've had enough of those. I need consistency. I need to see that you're here for the long haul, not just until things get tough again." John nodded, taking her words to heart. He knew that actions, not promises, would determine whether they could truly move forward. John's transformation continued as he redefined his role in the community. He began hosting weekly workshops on financial literacy, teaching low-income families how to manage their finances and plan for the future. He even started mentoring a group of young entrepreneurs, sharing the lessons he'd learned in his journey to success and the mistakes he'd made along the way. Maria, though still wary, couldn't help but admire his efforts. She attended one of his workshops out of curiosity and was struck by the genuine connection he had with the attendees. His humility and willingness to listen set him apart from the man she had once known. But not everyone was convinced of John's sincerity. Adam, still bitter and resentful, began stirring up trouble. He spread rumors that John's community work was a calculated attempt to win Maria back and repair his public image. When Maria heard the rumors, her heart sank. Confronting John that evening, she demanded answers. "Is any of this real?" she asked, her voice trembling. Or is this just another way to save face? John's expression was pained. Maria, I can't control what Adam says, but I can tell you that everything I've done since meeting you has been real. I don't care about my reputation anymore. I care about you and Ethan. Though his words were earnest, Maria's doubts lingered. She resolved to watch and wait, letting time reveal the truth. The turning point came during a community event John had organized, a fundraiser to support the garden project and expand it to other neighborhoods. Maria agreed to attend with Ethan, wanting to show her support, but keeping her distance emotionally. The event was a resounding success, with families and local leaders expressing their gratitude for John's efforts. Ethan was thrilled to see his artwork, a colorful drawing of the garden, displayed at the event. John proudly pointed it out to attendees, his genuine pride in Ethan shining through. As the night wore on, Maria found herself drawn to John's side. Watching him interact with the community, she saw not the arrogant businessman she had first met, but a man who had been humbled and changed by his experiences. At the end of the evening, John approached Maria with a nervous smile. "Thank you for coming," he said. "It means a lot to me, and to Ethan." Maria's reply was soft but heartfelt. "I'm proud of what you're doing, John. It's inspiring." Just as things seemed to be improving, a crisis struck. Ethan fell ill, his fever spiking late one night. Maria, panicked, called John, who rushed over without hesitation. Together, they took Ethan to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with a severe but treatable respiratory infection. John stayed by Maria's side throughout the ordeal, holding her hand as they waited for updates and comforting her when her fears overwhelmed her. For Maria, it was a glimpse of the partner she had always hoped John could be. As Ethan recovered, Maria allowed herself to lean on John more, letting him help with the day-to-day responsibilities that had always fallen solely on her shoulders. Their shared concern for Ethan created a bond that began to heal the fractures in their relationship. One evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Maria and John sat on the couch, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on them. Maria broke the silence. "You've been here for us, in ways I didn't expect," she said quietly. "But I'm still scared, John. I'm scared of trusting you and getting hurt again." John reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I understand, Maria. And I'm not going anywhere. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you can trust me." Maria looked into his eyes, seeing a vulnerability she had never noticed before. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward together. As John continued to show his commitment, Maria's walls began to crumble. She started to open up about her own fears and dreams, sharing stories of her struggles and the hopes she had for Ethan's future. John listened intently, his respect for her growing with every word. Their relationship, though still fragile, began to take on a new depth. They weren't just rebuilding trust. They were building something entirely new, something based on honesty, vulnerability, and a shared determination to create a better life for Ethan. The weeks following Ethan's recovery marked a turning point for John and Maria. Their tentative friendship began to blossom into something more profound. John continued to show up, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. Whether it was helping Ethan with his math homework or showing up at the diner just to share a cup of coffee during Maria's break, John's actions spoke louder than his words. Ethan adored John, his innocent enthusiasm serving as a bridge between Maria and John. Each evening spent together felt less like an awkward attempt to rebuild trust and more like the beginnings of a family. Maria, however, remained cautious. She still heard whispers of doubt in her mind, fueled by Adam's meddling. But each time John looked at her with genuine affection, those whispers grew fainter. Unbeknownst to John, Adam had been quietly plotting his revenge. He couldn't accept John's transformation and saw his dedication to Maria as an affront to their friendship. Fueled by jealousy and a bruised ego, Adam orchestrated a plan to expose the bet in the most public way possible. One evening, while John was busy at a community event, Adam cornered Maria at the diner. His smirk was smug as he slid into a booth across from her. "Maria, I thought you'd like to know the real reason John has been so invested in your life," Adam began, his voice laced with mock concern. Maria's expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" Adam leaned in, savoring the moment. "It was a bet. $2 million to be exact. John didn't approach you out of love or curiosity. He wanted to prove he could win you over." Maria's heart sank. The words felt like a physical blow. She stared at Adam, searching for any sign of deceit in his face, but his smirk told her he was relishing her pain. "You're lying," Maria said, her voice shaking. Adam shrugged nonchalantly. "Ask John yourself. Or better yet, ask him why he hasn't told you." Maria's confrontation with John that evening was explosive. When he returned home, exhausted but content from the success of the fundraiser, he found her waiting on the couch, her arms crossed and her expression icy. "Why didn't you tell me about the bet?" she demanded, before he could even sit down. John froze, his mind racing. He had planned to tell her eventually, but he had been waiting for the right moment, a moment that now seemed impossibly far away. "Maria, let me explain." "Explain what, John?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "That I was just some challenge for you to conquer? That my life, my struggles, were nothing more than a game to you?" John stepped closer, his hands outstretched in a gesture of pleading. "It wasn't like that. Yes, it started as a bet, but it changed, Maria. You changed everything." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "And you didn't think I deserved to know? You let me believe you were different. But you're just like everyone else, who's taken advantage of me." John's heart broke at her words. "I didn't know how to tell you without losing you. And then I fell in love with you, Maria. With you and Ethan." Maria shook her head, stepping back as if his proximity burned her. "Love doesn't start with lies, John." The days that followed were marked by silence. Maria refused to answer John's calls, and Ethan, sensing the tension, became withdrawn. John's once bustling community projects felt hollow without Maria's presence, and he struggled to find solace in his work. Maria, meanwhile, was torn. Her anger toward John warred with the undeniable feelings she had developed for him. She hated that despite everything, part of her still wanted to believe he could change. Ethan, too, felt the weight of their separation. One evening, he asked Maria a question that broke her heart. "Is John not coming back? I thought he was going to be my dad." Maria hugged him tightly, unable to answer. John knew words wouldn't be enough to win Maria back. He needed to show her through actions that he was sincere. He began with the diner, funding a much-needed renovation. Anonymously, he expanded his community initiatives, ensuring they reached more families like Maria's. But these acts, though well-intentioned, couldn't replace the trust he had broken. Finally, John decided to make a personal sacrifice. He liquidated his shares in his company, using the money to create a foundation in Maria's name. The foundation's mission was to provide scholarships and support for single parents pursuing their dreams. When Maria learned about the foundation, she was overwhelmed. John had quietly created something that reflected her values, something that would impact countless lives. Maria agreed to meet John if only to thank him for the foundation. Their conversation was guarded, both treading carefully around the fragile remnants of their relationship. "You didn't have to do this," Maria said softly, referring to the foundation. "I did," John replied. "Not to win you back, but because it was the right thing to do. You've inspired me, Maria. You've shown me what strength and resilience look like." Maria looked at him, searching for the arrogance that had once defined him. Instead, she saw a man humbled by his mistakes, a man trying to be better. Over time, Maria began to let John back into her life, though cautiously. She made it clear that their relationship would be rebuilt on her terms, with honesty and transparency at its core. John agreed without hesitation, grateful for even the smallest chance to earn her trust again. Ethan's joy at seeing John again was palpable. His laughter filled their home once more, and Maria couldn't deny the positive impact John had on her son. As they worked to rebuild their relationship, John continued to prove his commitment through small, consistent actions. He became a fixture in Ethan's life, helping him with school projects, attending his soccer games, and encouraging his artistic talents. One evening, as the three of them sat together painting a mural in the community garden, Maria looked at John and saw not the man who had deceived her, but the man he had become. She saw someone who had faced his flaws and worked tirelessly to change, someone who truly cared for her and Ethan. "I'm still scared," Maria admitted quietly. John took her hand, his gaze steady. "I know, and I'll keep proving to you every day that I'm here for the long haul." Maria nodded, a small smile breaking through her doubt. "Then let's see where this goes." For the first time, hope felt stronger than fear. Together, they began to build a future, one step at a time. Months had passed since Maria agreed to give John a second chance, and the community they were building together began to thrive. The scholarship foundation John established in Maria's name gained momentum, with dozens of parents benefiting from the program. Maria took an active role in managing the foundation, organizing workshops, and connecting with single parents who shared stories similar to hers. John, now a regular figure in the community, hosted a fundraiser to celebrate the foundation's success. The event was a modest but heartfelt gathering held in the community garden, now a vibrant space filled with art and laughter. John's corporate demeanor had softened, replaced by a warmth that surprised even him. Ethan was especially excited. He had painted a mural for the event, featuring a phoenix rising from the ashes, a symbol of resilience. Maria couldn't have been prouder of her son, and John's support for Ethan's creativity further solidified their bond. As the event unfolded, Maria watched John interact with the attendees. He was no longer the detached businessman she had met months ago. Instead, he listened intently to each story, his empathy genuine. Maria felt a surge of hope, though a part of her still guarded against fully trusting him. Unbeknownst to John and Maria, Adam hadn't given up on his vendetta. While John had distanced himself from his old circle, Adam remained bitter over John's transformation and the perceived betrayal of their friendship. Seeing John succeed in his new life only fueled Adam's jealousy. At the fundraiser, Adam made an uninvited appearance. He sauntered into the garden, his presence a stark contrast to the warm, welcoming atmosphere. Maria spotted him first, her posture stiffening. She immediately recognized the smug expression on his face, the same one he had worn when he first revealed the bet. John noticed Maria's discomfort and followed her gaze. When his eyes landed on Adam, his jaw tightened. He excused himself from the conversation he was having and approached Adam, determined to confront him before he could cause any trouble. "What are you doing here?" John asked, his tone firm but controlled. Adam smirked. Just came to see the great John Rivers in action. Quite the transformation, huh? John's patience was wearing thin. If you're here to cause problems, leave. Adam ignored the warning, his voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Does Maria know about the real John Rivers, about the man who didn't think twice about betting on her life? Or are you still spinning your redemption story? The garden fell silent as Adam's words hung in the air. Maria's face paled, her worst fears resurfacing. She had forgiven John for the bet, but hearing it brought up memories of the pain it had caused. John stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Yes, Adam. She knows. She knows about my mistakes, and she knows how hard I've worked to make things right. Unlike you, I've moved on and built something meaningful. Maria's heart raced as she watched the two men. She could see the sincerity in John's eyes, but Adam's presence cast a shadow over the evening. Moved on, Adam sneered. You think throwing money at a foundation erases what you did? You think you're a hero now? John took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. I'm not a hero, and I don't pretend to be. I'm just a man who made mistakes and is trying to do better. If you came here to tear me down, it won't work. This isn't about me. It's about Maria, Ethan, and this community. His words silenced Adam, who hadn't expected John to stand so firmly. The guests murmured among themselves, their initial shock replaced by admiration for John's honesty. Maria stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. Adam, you've said enough. This event isn't about the past. It's about the future. If you can't respect that, you should leave. Adam hesitated, his confidence faltering under the weight of her words. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his bitterness unresolved. After Adam's departure, John addressed the crowd. He didn't want the event to end on a sour note, and he knew the best way to move forward was through transparency. Everyone here deserves to know the truth, John began, his voice steady despite the vulnerability he felt. When I first met Maria, I was a different person. I let my ego guide my decisions, and I hurt people because of it. Maria was one of those people, and I've spent every day since trying to make up for that. He glanced at Maria, who nodded subtly, encouraging him to continue. What I've learned through this journey is that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it and using those lessons to create something better. I owe everything to Maria and Ethan for showing me what truly matters. The crowd erupted in applause, their support a testament to John's transformation. Maria felt a wave of emotion, her guarded heart beginning to soften. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Ethan had fallen asleep, John and Maria sat together in the quiet garden. The moonlight illuminated their faces, and the tension from earlier had given way to a sense of peace. Thank you for standing up to Adam, Maria said, her voice soft, and for being honest with everyone. John took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. I meant every word, Maria. I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me. Maria looked at him, her walls finally beginning to crumble. You've changed, John. I can see that. But trust takes time to rebuild. I'll wait as long as it takes, he replied without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, John and Maria worked together more closely than ever. They became partners not just in the foundation, but in life. John continued to show his dedication through actions, not just words, and Maria began to let herself believe in the possibility of a future together. Ethan, oblivious to the complexities of adult relationships, flourished under John's guidance. His confidence grew, and his artwork gained recognition, in local competitions. One evening, as they sat together in their small but vibrant garden, Maria turned to John. "Maybe it's time we stopped looking back and started building something new." John smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't agree more." As they embraced, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by the promise of a brighter future. For John, Maria, and Ethan, the garden became a symbol of growth, resilience, and the power of second chances. Months after the confrontation with Adam, life in the community had reached a steady rhythm. The foundation had grown beyond Maria and John's initial expectations, offering scholarships, training programs, and support groups for single parents. Yet, despite their shared successes, a sense of incompleteness lingered between Maria and John. Maria often found herself reflecting on the scars of the past. While she admired John's transformation, she hadn't fully reconciled with the pain he had caused. Her trust in him was fragile, like glass, patched together, but still vulnerable to cracks. One autumn afternoon, Maria received a letter from her estranged sister, Lila. They hadn't spoken in years, their relationship fractured by disagreements over family obligations. The letter was an olive branch, an invitation to reconnect, but it also dredged up memories Maria had buried. John noticed her unease and approached her as she sat at the kitchen table, the letter clenched in her hands. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maria hesitated before handing him the letter. "It's from my sister. We haven't spoken in a long time." John read the letter, his brow furrowing. "Do you want to see her?" Maria exhaled deeply. "I'm not sure. There's so much unresolved between us. But maybe it's time." John nodded. "If you want to go, I'll be there for you. Whatever you need." A week later, Maria, John, and Ethan traveled to Lila's home in a quiet suburb. The reunion was tense at first, with polite but guarded exchanges. Lila had always been the outspoken one, and her initial remarks hinted at skepticism about John. "So this is the famous John Rivers," Lila said, her tone half joking. "I've heard a lot about you." John smiled politely. "I hope some of it was good." Lila shrugged. "We'll see." As the day unfolded, the sisters began to bridge their divide. They reminisced about their childhood, shared laughter over old memories, and even shed tears as they addressed past grievances. John observed from the sidelines, stepping in occasionally to help with Ethan or offer a kind word. By the end of the visit, Lila pulled Maria aside. "I can see he's trying, Maria, and I can see how much he cares about you and Ethan. Just don't lose yourself in all this." Maria nodded, her sister's words resonating deeply. Rebuilding relationships, whether with John or Lila, required balance and self-awareness. She resolved to hold on to her identity while embracing the new connections in her life. On the drive back, Maria turned to John. "Thank you for coming with me. I know family drama isn't exactly your thing." John chuckled softly. "It's part of life, isn't it? And I want to be part of yours. All of it." Maria smiled, touched by his sincerity. "You've come a long way, John." "So have you," he replied, glancing at her with admiration. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for the first time in a while, Maria felt a sense of peace. The visit to Lila's had been healing, not just for her, but for the new life she was building with John. As the foundation grew, so did the challenges. Balancing their personal lives with the demands of the foundation began to take a toll. John, despite his efforts to be present, found himself slipping back into old habits of overwork. Late nights in his office and missed family dinners became more frequent. One evening, Maria confronted him. "John, we agreed to do this together. but lately it feels like you're slipping away." John looked at her, guilt etched on his face. "I'm sorry, Maria. I thought I was helping by focusing on the foundation." "You are," Maria said softly. "But we need you here too. Ethan needs you. I need you." John nodded, realizing she was right. "I'll make changes." I promised. True to his word, John began delegating more responsibilities at the foundation, allowing himself to focus on what mattered most: his family. He attended Ethan's school events, planned quiet evenings with Maria, and even picked up new hobbies, like gardening, to spend more time at home. One weekend, John surprised Maria and Ethan with a trip to the countryside. They stayed in a small cabin, surrounded by rolling hills and autumn foliage. It was a stark contrast to the luxurious trips John had once preferred, but it was perfect for their family. Ethan spent the days exploring the woods, while John and Maria shared quiet moments on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunset. It was during one of these moments that John spoke from the heart. "Maria, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through, the mistakes I've made, the pain I've caused. I don't deserve the second chance you've given me, but I'm grateful for it every day." Maria reached for his hand, her touch reassuring. "You've earned it, John. Not through words, but through actions. And that means everything." Back in the city, Ethan's art was gaining recognition. His mural at the community garden had caught the attention of a local art gallery, which invited him to showcase his work. The event was a proud moment for both Maria and John, who marveled at Ethan's talent and confidence. During the gallery opening, Ethan stood by his painting, explaining its meaning to curious attendees. John watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. "He's amazing," John said to Maria. "You've raised an incredible son." "We've raised him," Maria corrected, her voice filled with gratitude. Inspired by the growth in their relationship, John began planning a new proposal, one that reflected their journey. He wanted it to be simple, heartfelt, and symbolic of the life they had built together. On a quiet evening, in the same community garden where their journey had taken a pivotal turn, John knelt before Maria. With Ethan by his side holding the ring, John looked into Maria's eyes. "Maria Harper, you've taught me what love, resilience, and family truly mean. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, John. Yes." Ethan cheered, wrapping his arms around both of them. In that moment, the past's shadows seemed to fade, replaced by the warm light of their shared future. As the weeks passed, preparations for a small, intimate wedding began. Maria and John chose to hold the ceremony in the community garden, surrounded by friends, family, and the people who had supported their journey. The morning of Maria and John's wedding dawned clear and bright. The community garden was transformed into a haven of love and hope, adorned with simple decorations, string lights, wildflowers, and personal touches contributed by friends and neighbors. It was a far cry from the grandiose events John's world once celebrated, yet it felt perfect. Maria stood in the modest house she now called home, her reflection staring back at her in a simple, elegant dress. Her best friend, Lisa, stood beside her, adjusting the hem and offering words of encouragement. "You look beautiful, Maria," Lisa said with a smile. "John's a lucky man." Maria nodded, her heart fluttering. "I just want this day to feel real, not like a fairy tale, but like us." Lisa placed a hand on her shoulder. "It already is. You've built something real, Maria, and everyone here knows it." Outside, John adjusted his tie nervously as Ethan tugged at his sleeve. "You're acting like you've never done this before." Ethan teased, his cheeky grin a perfect reminder of how far they'd come as a family. John chuckled, kneeling to straighten Ethan's bow tie. "You're right, buddy. But this time, it actually matters." As the ceremony began, Maria walked down the aisle, her eyes meeting John's. The community gathered around them wasn't just an audience. They were a testament to the life John and Maria had created. A life built on trust, resilience, and mutual respect. Their vows were simple yet profound. John spoke of his transformation, the lessons he'd learned from Maria and Ethan, and his promise to always strive for the honesty and love they had nurtured together. Maria, in turn, spoke of forgiveness, growth, and her gratitude for the family they had become. When they exchanged rings, Ethan was the first to cheer, clapping wildly and shouting, "Finally!" After the ceremony, the reception unfolded with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt conversations. Maria and John chose to keep things intimate, focusing on the people who had supported their journey. Lila made a heartfelt toast, acknowledging her initial doubts but expressing admiration for how John had proven himself. "Maria, you've always been the strongest person I know," Lila said, raising her glass. "And John, you've shown us all that change is possible when it comes from the heart. Here's to a future filled with love and hope." As the evening wore on, John took Ethan aside, leading him to a quiet corner of the garden. "I want to ask you something important," John began, kneeling to meet Ethan's gaze. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. John held out a small box containing a signet ring. "Ethan, I know I'm not your biological dad, but I love you like my own. Would you be okay if I officially adopted you?" Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless. Then, he threw his arms around John, holding him tightly. "Yes, I'd love that." Tears glistened in John's eyes as he hugged Ethan back. "Thank you, Ethan. You've made me the happiest man today." Over the following months, John and Maria's foundation expanded its reach, touching lives across the city. John's experience as a tech entrepreneur allowed him to streamline operations, ensuring resources were directed to those who needed them most. Maria, with her first-hand knowledge of struggle and resilience, became the heart of the foundation, connecting with families and offering them hope. Ethan's artwork gained further recognition, and he began teaching art workshops for children in the community. His murals, filled with vibrant colors and themes of unity, became symbols of the foundation's mission. One particularly moving event occurred when the foundation hosted a scholarship awards ceremony. A young woman named Sophia, who had once struggled as a single mother, stepped onto the stage to thank Maria and John. "You didn't just give me financial help," Sophia said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You showed me that my story mattered, that I could rewrite it. And now, I'm starting college to become a teacher." The audience erupted in applause, and John and Maria exchanged a proud glance. Moments like these reminded them why they had started the foundation. As the seasons changed, Maria and John received unexpected but joyful news. They were expecting a baby. The announcement brought a wave of emotions. Ethan was ecstatic at the idea of becoming a big brother, and Maria and John saw it as another step in their journey together. The months leading up to the baby's arrival were filled with preparations and heartfelt moments. John often stayed up late, reading parenting books and planning a nursery, while Maria marveled at the man he had become. John Rivers woke early that morning, his resolve hardened by weeks of reflection and regret. The weight of Maria's rejection had driven him to confront truths he had long ignored about himself, his priorities, and the emptiness of his once glamorous life. He had spent hours drafting plans, not for his company, but for Maria and Ethan. He needed to show them, not just tell them, that he was committed to becoming a man they could trust. The first step was humility. John knew his wealth and power had often been a shield against vulnerability, but this time they were useless. What mattered now was sincerity. And for Maria to believe in his transformation, he had to start from the ground up. John began his efforts by reconnecting with Ethan, whose presence had been a source of unexpected joy and grounding. Knowing Maria's trust would be harder to rebuild, John approached Ethan with caution. One afternoon, he sent a simple message to Maria. "I'd like to see Ethan if he's okay with it. I won't push if you're uncomfortable." Maria hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering over her phone. She finally typed, "You can pick him up after school tomorrow. Don't disappoint him." The following day, John waited outside Ethan's school, nerves gripping him as the bell rang. When Ethan saw him, the boy's face lit up, and he ran toward John, carrying a stack of his drawings. "John, look, I drew more robots like we talked about," Ethan exclaimed, shoving the papers into John's hands. John knelt to Ethan's level, taking in the colorful sketches with genuine admiration. "These are incredible, buddy. You've got a real talent." The two spent the afternoon at a nearby park, Ethan chatting excitedly as they played catch and talked about his dreams of becoming an inventor. John's heart ached with a mix of joy and guilt. He wanted to be part of Ethan's life, not because of the bet, but because he cared deeply for the boy. Meanwhile, Maria remained wary. She watched from her apartment window as John walked Ethan back home, his demeanor more relaxed and genuine than she remembered. When they came inside, John handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" Maria asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "It's not what you think," John replied. "It's a grant proposal. I've started a community fund for single parents to help with education and childcare. I named it after my mother. She raised me on her own, and I never truly appreciated what that meant until now." Maria opened the envelope, scanning the details. The grant wasn't flashy or self-serving. It was practical, aimed at providing real support for struggling families. She looked up at John, her skepticism softening. "This is thoughtful," she admitted, "but it doesn't erase what happened." "I know," John said quietly, "but it's a start." A week later, John invited Maria and Ethan to a community dinner he had organized. The event was held in a modest community center, a stark contrast to the lavish galas he once frequented. The room buzzed with families, local leaders, and volunteers, all eager to hear about the new initiative. Maria hesitated as she entered, her hand on Ethan's shoulder. She was used to being in the background, not the spotlight, but John greeted her with a warm smile, easing her nerves. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice sincere. "I'm glad you're here." During the dinner, John took the stage to speak about the fund and his motivation for starting it. He shared personal stories about his mother and how meeting Maria and Ethan had changed his perspective. His words were heartfelt, and for the first time, Maria saw a side of John that felt completely genuine.